All right, hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive here on Grister or Gifted. You know the drill. We take a deep dive into the life of someone who's made a big splash, someone who's really stirred things up, and try to figure out if they're genuinely trying to make the world a better place or just, out for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And today we're diving headfirst into the world of, well, Chris Hansen,
The To Catch a Predator guy.
the one and only. I mean, love him or hate him, you can't deny he made a huge impact on how we view online safety.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like
Yeah.
think about it. To Catch a Predator was a phenomenon. Averaging something like 7 million viewers per episode. I mean,
Yeah.
people are still quoting his lines today. Have a seat.
Right, it's ingrained in pop culture.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what makes him so fascinating to dissect. Was he a crusader for justice, exposing a real threat, or was he exploiting vulnerable people for ratings? It's a tricky one.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. To Catch a Predator was on Dateline NBC, right?
Exactly. And it ran for a good while, too, from 2004 to 2007, with some specials thrown in there as well.
And the premise was basically they'd set up these sting operations where they'd pose as minors online, lure these would-be predators to a house, and then boom, Chris Hansen is there with the cameras and the whole world watching.
Exactly. And, it definitely tapped into a very real fear, the fear of online predators. But was it really raising awareness and protecting potential victims, or was it just a spectacle exploiting that fear for entertainment? That's what we're going to try to unravel today.
Right. Because the show got a lot of heat for its methods. Some folks argued it was more about public humiliation than, actual justice.
Yeah.
Like there was this case in Texas where a federal judge actually ruled that NBC had pressured the local police
Yeah.
to use like really extreme tactics that weren't even necessary just to ramp up the drama for the viewers.
Yeah, and legal experts even argued that the show's tactics could be considered entrapment. There were concerns about the ethics of publicly showing people who technically hadn't been convicted of any crime.
Right. Like, did they cross the line by kind of acting as judge, jury, and executioner all in one?
It's a complex debate, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, so let's talk about Chris Hansen himself for a bit. Because his personal life seemed to take a nosedive right around the time the show was facing all this criticism.
It's interesting how that happens, isn't it? The man who made a career out of exposing other people's secrets ends up having his own life under the microscope.
Exactly. He ended up getting divorced after what, like 30 years of marriage?
Yeah, amidst accusations of infidelity. And as if that wasn't enough, his financial situation started crumbling too.
Like bounced checks, tax evasion accusations.
Mounting debt, apparently over $1 million. Not a good look for the guy who built his career on exposing the bad guys.
No, not at all. And then there's the Stanford incident, which really makes you question, his financial dealings. He was accused of writing bad checks for almost $13,000.
For promotional items for his show, of all things.
Oh, wow, early.
Yeah, and to make things even more intriguing, those items were linked to a Kickstarter campaign he had for his show. Some backers claimed he never actually gave them the rewards they were promised.
Oh, man. So not only was he allegedly bouncing checks, he was also potentially deceiving his own supporters. Yikes.
It definitely doesn't paint a pretty picture, does it?
Right.
It seems like he was trying to ride that to catch a predator wave, even if it meant cutting corners and maybe, taking advantage of people.
And even today, he's still sort of clinging to that, right? I mean, he's got those predator catching shows on YouTube, and then there was that weird appearance with Logan Paul where he called Dylan Dennis a predator.
Yeah, that was a whole other can of worms. It felt like he was trying to stay relevant by jumping on whatever controversial bandwagon was rolling by.
Okay, so this is what we're trying to figure out today. Was Chris Hansen a visionary who, used his platform to expose a serious issue? Or was he just a savvy con artist who profited from fear and spectacle?
And to get to the bottom of that, we need to dig even deeper.
Right. So stick with us because in the next part, we're going to look at what happened to Hansen after To Catch a Predator, after the scandals, after he fell from grace.
Did he try to rebuild his life? Did he learn from his mistakes? What's he up to now? That's where we'll pick things up next time. Welcome back. Last time, we were talking about Chris Hansen and trying to figure out, was he really all about exposing these online predators, or was it more about, personal gain in the spotlight?
Right, right. So what happened after To Catch a Predator went off the air? Did he, lay low after all those scandals, or did he double down on his whole predator catcher persona?
Well, it seems like he tried to walk a fine line. He did some stuff to distance himself from the controversies, but also, kind of held on to that To Catch a Predator fame.
Okay, so what did you do?
He stayed in media. He hosted some shows on YouTube, talking about current events, doing interviews. He even tried to launch a new TV show called Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, all about exposing scams and fraud.
So even with all the accusations and stuff, he still wanted to be seen as like a crusader for justice.
It seems that way. But, the question is, did it work? Did the public buy it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Hard to say for sure. I mean, he definitely still had fans, but it feels like, all those personal scandals and the hypocrisy really hurt his credibility.
Yeah.
It's hard to be the predator catcher when you've got your own baggage.
Totally. And speaking of baggage, didn't he try to bring back To Catch a Predator itself?
He did. In 2015, he launched a Kickstarter campaign for a web series reboot called, Hansen versus Predator.
Oh, yeah.
And the campaign did well. They got enough money to actually produce the series, and it aired in 2016.
Wow. So he was back to catching predators.
In a way, yeah. But this Kickstarter thing, this is where things get even more interesting, because remember those promotional items he was accused of buying with bad checks?
Yeah.
Those were for this Kickstarter.
No way. Seriously.
He promised backers rewards, things like mugs and T-shirts for contributing to the campaign. But a lot of those backers said they never got their stuff.
Wow. So not only was he potentially bouncing checks for this merchandise, but he might not have even delivered on his promises.
It really doesn't look good. And remember, this wasn't some small-time operation. This was Chris Hansen. He had a huge platform, national recognition, yet he couldn't or wouldn't fulfill his promises to his own supporters.
Yeah, that's tough to explain away.
Okay.
So fast forward a bit. Where's Chris Hansen now? Is he still out there catching predators?
Well, as of 2022, he joined a streaming service called True Blue. He's still doing that predator catching content. And you mentioned that appearance with Logan Paul in 2023.
Yeah, at that boxing press conference.
Right. Logan Paul brought Hansen out as this predator catching expert, and then they basically called Dylan Dennis, his opponent, a predator because of how Dennis was treating Logan Paul's fiance online.
Yeah, that whole thing felt kind of bizarre.
It did. It felt like he was making light of a really serious issue. And for Hansen to align himself with Logan Paul, who's known for, being pretty outrageous, it just made things even more messy.
Okay, but to be fair, Hansen has never actually been charged with any crimes related to this predator catching stuff, right?
True. But he had a close call back in 2021. There was an arrest warrant issued for him in Michigan.
What? Chris Hansen almost got arrested. Why?
He was involved in a sting operation targeting people accused of child sexual abuse.
So Chris Hansen, Mr. To Catch a Predator, almost got arrested for participating in a predator sting.
Yeah.
That's ironic.
Right. The warrant was because he didn't show up in court to present evidence, but then his lawyer explained it was a misunderstanding, that Hansen hadn't been properly served with a subpoena, so the warrant was dropped.
Wow, what a roller coaster.
Exactly. It just goes to show how risky those vigilante operations can be, even for someone who's supposedly an expert. It brings us back to this whole question of where's the line between justice, entertainment, and personal gain? Chris Hansen made a career out of exposing the dark side of people, but maybe he got caught up in those same temptations.
So we've looked at his attempts to get back in the game, his predator catching stuff, his run-ins with the law. We've seen how his personal life and his financial struggles have impacted his image. What's the verdict? Grifter or gifted?
Man, that's the million-dollar question. What do you think?
All right, so we're back, and we're still trying to untangle this whole Chris Hansen situation. Last we left off, things were getting pretty messy with that whole Dylan Dennis incident.
Oh, yeah. That one was a doozy. It really brings together a lot of what we've been talking about with Hansen, the blurred lines, the spotlight seeking, and, well, whether his actions actually line up with his supposed good intentions.
Okay, so remind me again how Hansen got involved with all that.
Okay, so you'll remember Logan Paul, the YouTuber, right? He brought Hansen out on stage at this boxing press conference to basically confront his opponent, Dylan Dennis. But it wasn't just a quick appearance. Hansen actually did what he called an investigation into Dennis. He interviewed people, tried to find evidence to back up Logan Paul's claims.
So he was basically acting as Logan Paul's personal investigator, using his whole To Catch a Predator fame to try and discredit Dennis and, hype up the fight.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's what made it so questionable. What were his motives here? Was he really trying to help, or was this just another attempt to stay relevant?
And what was Dennis even accused of?
It all stemmed from Danis's behavior online towards Nina Agdal, Logan Paul's fiancée.
Okay.
He was harassing her online, posting explicit stuff, making really nasty comments, even threatening legal action against her.
Whoa, that's pretty serious.
It was. Agdal actually ended up getting a restraining order against him and even filed a lawsuit. Defamation, emotional distress, invasion of privacy, a whole 9 yards.
Wow. So where does Hansen fit into all this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He claimed he was trying to be, like, the good guy to expose Danis and protect Agdal, but a lot of people saw right through that. They thought he was just trying to use the situation to, attach himself to a celebrity like Logan Paul and give his career a little boost.
Which, as we've seen, wouldn't be out of character for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened with this investigation?
Well, things got really messy. Danis denied everything, said it was all lies cooked up by Logan Paul to make him look bad before the fight.
So a classic he said, she said situation,
Ugh.
and Hansen's stuck in the middle.
Exactly. Hansen ended up releasing his findings in these YouTube videos. But the evidence, well, it wasn't very convincing. It was mostly just interviews with people who already had beef with Danis. The whole thing felt more like, I don't know, a tabloid story than a real investigation.
So instead of clearing things up, he just added fuel to the fire.
Pretty much. And in the end, it didn't really change anything. The fight happened. Danis got disqualified for breaking the rules, which just added to his bad boy image.
Sounds about right. So what about Hansen? Any consequences for him?
Oh, he got hit with a ton of criticism.
Yeah.
Danis's fans were obviously furious, called him a pawn for Logan Paul. And even the people who supported Agdal, they felt like he just used her situation for his own gain, Made a spectacle out of something really serious.
So he didn't really help anyone and just ended up looking worse.
It was a pretty big miscalculation, yeah. It feels like every time he tries to make a comeback, he just digs himself a deeper hole. And it kind of makes you wonder, is he really trying to do good, or is it all about the attention?
Okay, so after going through all of this, Chris Hansen's career, his highs and lows, his very public struggles, where do we land? Grifter or gifted? What's the verdict?
It's never that simple. He definitely had talent. There's no denying he was a gifted storyteller, a master at drawing people in. And he shined a light on some really important issues. For a while, he seemed like, the real deal, a guy trying to make a difference.
But then you've got all the other stuff, the scandals, the money problems, the ethical questions. All that really casts a shadow over everything.
And that's the tragedy of Chris Hansen, in my opinion. He had the potential to be a real force for good, but his flaws, his mistakes, they overshadowed everything else. He leaves behind a really complicated legacy.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about these deep dives.
Right.
It's rarely a clear-cut good guy or bad guy situation. We end up with more questions than answers.
Exactly. And in the end, it's up to each of us to decide what we think about Chris Hansen. Was he a hero with flaws or just an opportunist? Did he change the world or just line his own pockets? We've laid out the evidence, told the story. Now it's your turn to decide.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Chris Hansen. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride, everyone. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the life of a polarizing figure. Until then, keep asking those tough questions, stay informed, and we'll see you soon.